If Kevin McCarthy strikes a deal with Biden that is too favorable to the left, it could cost him his speakership. And here's why. First, if you like the content, please be sure to drop a like and subscribe. It helps out the channel a lot. And it'll let you know when I upload new content so you could find me easier. So, Kevin McCarthy, back in January of 2022, when he was being voted on to become Speaker of the House, I'm sure you guys all remember how much of a fiasco it was, and that it ended up taking 15 votes for Speaker McCarthy to be elected as Speaker of the House, okay? And this is because of opposition from within his own party from the far right flank known as the House Freedom Caucus, okay? And we're going to look at some of the members of the House Freedom Caucus later in the video, but just know that what they wanted out of Kevin McCarthy in order for him to gain their vote for Speaker is more and more concessions out of him than have ever been given up by any Speaker of the House in history. And one of these concessions was to change the House rules so that any one member of the House can call for a vote for his ouster at any given time. Now, before, you'd have to have a majority of the House that was calling for the Speaker's ouster in order to have a vote. But now it's just one member. Now, we're already seeing the real world effects that were predicted by many back in January when the whole fiasco happened in the debt ceiling fight against Joe Biden. Okay? Because what's happening right now is that as Biden and McCarthy are reportedly inching closer and closer and closer together on reaching a deal to raise the debt ceiling, Kevin McCarthy's problem is that he can't play ball with Biden too much, because any deal that is seen by the House Freedom Caucus being too favorable to Biden, then they're not going to vote for it, and it's going to require Democrats coming across the aisle in the House to make up the votes from the House Freedom Caucus, okay? Because remember, the Republicans have a 5-seat majority in the House, meaning that they can't afford to lose more than those 5 members on any particular vote if the Democrats are voting in unison lockstep, which recent history shows us that they have been, and they are going to continue to vote in lockstep with each other. So got a couple of articles here I want to show you guys. Firstly, we're going to head into just who some of these House Freedom Caucus members are. Now, if you want to go read the full list, it's over here on Newsweek. This is an article from November of last year. And some of these people I'm sure you've heard of, some of them maybe not, but these are all members of the House Freedom Caucus, which are the furthest right members in the House. So these are members elected in the 117th Congress. We got Scott Perry, Pennsylvania; Lauren Boebert, Colorado; Chip Roy, Texas; Jim Jordan from Ohio; Warren Davidson from Ohio; Andy Biggs from Arizona; Dan Bishop from North Carolina; Mo Brooks from Alabama; Ken Buck from Colorado; Ted Budd from North Carolina; Madison Cawthorn from North Carolina. The list goes on here. Marjorie Taylor Greene, of course, we've all heard of her, and Paul Gosar, unfortunately, we've heard of them. The list goes on here, but as you can see, it's quite a substantially large political faction in the right. And with the majority being so slender for the Republicans in the House, McCarthy needs every single one of their votes unless he's planning on crossover support from the left going across the aisle. But what that could mean is the end of his speakership. and the debt ceiling gets raised, but it costs McCarthy literally everything. Okay, so here's an article from Politico. It says House conservatives blanch at leaked details of McCarthy-Biden debt talks. As details leak about an emerging bipartisan debt deal just days before a possible default, House conservatives are growing increasingly unhappy. With House GOP leadership revealing few policy specifics as talks continue, their lawmakers have sought information elsewhere. In this case, some GOP members are consulting a list said to detail exactly where the negotiations have found common ground. Okay, Among the details, according to the Republicans, an agreement to lift the debt limit through 2024, a procedure in place to incentivize Congress to pass all 12 spending bills, and a plan to claw back unspent COVID money. The two sides are still working out the GOP's demands for work requirements for certain safety net programs. An aide to Speaker McCarthy did not respond to a request for comment on the list. When asked how many members saw the list, Burchett smiled and told reporters, next question. Okay, so the two sides are also still working out the GOP's demands for work requirements for certain safety net programs, okay? Any deal that Biden is going to agree to, it's not going to have these demands for work requirements because Biden has already said that that is a red line. That is not going to fly, and he's not going to pass a deal that raises work requirements. Okay, it's simply not on the table for the Democrats. So if it's something that McCarthy's considering, he's going to need Democratic support. One of the concerned lawmakers was Ralph Norman, a member of the Conservative Freedom Caucus, who has repeatedly stated he didn't want anything less than what the GOP passed as their debt plan last month. Right, he's referring to the GOP's Limit, Grow, and Save Act, which raised the debt ceiling for the next 2 years in exchange for returning spending levels back to 2020 levels and freezing discretionary spending. Okay, things that the Democrats are not going to pallet. McCarthy doesn't have a 218 on that unless he gets Democrats, Norman said of their emerging proposal, noting he saw the list from Burchett. If he gets Democrats, that's a telltale sign. Rep. Bob Good echoed Norman, citing concerns about rumors of a potential deal that would raise the debt ceiling for more money and more time than Republicans wanted, and for a whole lot less in return than what we need. If that were true, that would absolutely collapse the Republican majority for the debt ceiling increase. The rising conservative angst over what could resemble a final deal is a preview of the intense whipping operation that the GOP leaders will need to begin once they've locked down an agreement. While conservatives were always unlikely to support an agreement with Democrats, it's a glimpse at the fury that could erupt on McCarthy's right flank over a Biden-approved deal, and that anger could have lingering implications for the California speakership long after the debt crisis is diffused. Rep. Brian Donalds, who of course voted against McCarthy's speakership over and over and over again, citing some of the things that are being thrown around, said he doesn't see the point in discussing Congress passing 12 appropriation bills if the spending is frankly too high. I think if the speaker negotiates that with the president, the speaker will find out there's a lot of Republicans who won't be agreeing with the speaker. Adding to the pressure they are beginning to apply, the House Freedom Caucus on Thursday publicly released a letter members sent to McCarthy, where they argued the current unity of the House GOP hinges on how he chooses to move forward. As you navigate the debt limit, you are the steward of this GOP unity and will determine whether it continues to strengthen and places a historic stamp on this Congress or evaporates, the Trump-aligned group wrote. Conservative lawmakers argued for 3 specific actions they wanted McCarthy pushing to include in any debt deal. Additional provisions to what were passed in the House GOP bill called for the party to demand Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen share how she arrived at June 1st as the earliest date of a potential default, and argued Republicans should pass a short-term agreement with limited cuts that would extend the debt ceiling through June. For some rank-and-file Republicans, it's no surprise their Freedom Caucus colleagues are threatening to jump ship as negotiations ensue. Those members argue it's unrealistic to expect McCarthy not to deviate from the bill they passed. Compromise logically requires some concessions. Even if they won't clearly state how they would vote, members like Norman and Good have said for weeks that they wouldn't consider anything less than the House bill. The Freedom Caucus has released a different statement last week, calling for McCarthy to call off talks with President Joe Biden entirely, arguing it left the Senate no choice but to take up the House bill. So, I'll read this here again. Even if they won't clearly state how they vote, members like Norman and Good have said for weeks they wouldn't consider anything less than the House bill, meaning referring to the GOP bill that was passed some weeks ago now. So, you have some House members going, well, concessions are going to be, it's going to be impossible to reach a deal without any concessions, because that's what negotiating is. It's giving concessions. But these hardballer Freedom Caucus members, you got two of them right here saying that any bill that comes out that gives any concessions, anything at all, that was not included in our bill that we passed, any concessions at all are given. You have people like Norman and Good saying that they're not going to vote for it, and we know that that only leaves 3 more members needed potentially to vote against it, and the bill is doomed in the face of unanimous Democrat opposition. Now, how is this going to be resolved? Nobody knows, right? This is the $1 million question right now. Is there a deal that's struck that gives a couple of bones to each side, and Kevin McCarthy has to convince these House Freedom Caucus members that it is worth passing the debt ceiling in order to avoid an economic catastrophe, and that the harm of failing to raise the debt ceiling would be far greater than the harm of what is in the bill to raise the debt ceiling? He's going to have to convince them of this. It's going to be a hard task. And on the Democratic side of things, you have to wonder, is there any appetite for the Democrats to save McCarthy and vote for a bipartisan bill and nullify the House Freedom Caucus members' opposition? You have to wonder, is there something in the Democrats, is there something there worth them doing that? Or are the optics of that so bad that the Democrats would rather have the threat of default loom and let McCarthy deal with his problems, his political problems on his own, and not give him any sort of help? You have to imagine that these conversations are being had right now, and if you're Hakeem Jeffries, you are certainly thinking about the implications of what voting for a debt ceiling raise with the Republicans would mean for the political future of the Democrats as well. Okay, so it goes on a little bit longer here. If you guys want to finish the whole article, you can go ahead and read that. But that's all I got for you guys in this one. Is McCarthy's butt going to be toast if he passes a deal with Biden? Remains to be seen. All right, I want to thank you guys so much for joining me for this one, and I'll catch you in the next video. All right, peace.